listening to The Trade Gods.
What's going on, player profiler faithful? It's Jason Allwine here with The Trade Gods. Matty Kiwu unfortunately couldn't make it with the holiday going on, but we are ready to be back strong next week. But I've got to keep divisional summer alive as we go division by division. You bringing a bye for each team across the NFL. We've covered a plethora of divisions now, and I figured if we're having me talk, we're going with the NFC South. I'm going to use any excuse I can to talk the Atlanta Falcons. So we've got 4 buys coming from me, 1 from each of the NFC teams. So go ahead, buckle up, and enjoy as we get into it. All right. I know I want to talk about the Falcons, but we'll get to that later. We're going to start things off with the Carolina Panthers. When you look around this team, you have to ask yourself, do you even think they're going to improve? And well, I think they will. I never really was a believer in Frank Reich, and I'm very excited to see what Dave Canales can do as a head coach. They've brought in some extra weapons for Bryce Young, slightly upgraded that offensive line. And of course, they brought in Jonathan Brooks, which I think will help the run game whenever he becomes healthy. But who am I buying? Well, I'm going to go with Ja'Tavion Sanders, the rookie tight end. They just drafted him in the 4th round, so I know that it wasn't, the best draft capital in the world. But heading into this process, he was viewed as the 2nd best tight end in this class, right behind Brock Bowers. And, I mean, it's not even that I totally believe in this prospect. He's got average enough athleticism. He runs the 4.6 940. He's 6'4", 245 pounds. He's got the good size. He's only 21 years old. He's got solid enough college production as well. 700 yards nearly last year with 2 receiving touchdowns, 600 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns the year before that. Get an early declare, which is pretty important for a tight end. But what mostly draws me to him is just going to be his current value and, projected role as a tight end in this league. Now, when we talk about rookie tight ends, generally it takes some time to break out. But what we saw last year from Sam Laporta and a few seasons ago from Kyle Pitts, even when you're thrust into a role where there's literally no one else in the room, generally you're going to find success. And that's what I believe we'll see from Ja'Tavion Sanders right now on our Dynasty or at Keep Trade Cuts Dynasty rankings. A little bit more of a conglomerate of rankings here where people can put in their stuff. Ja'Tavion Sanders is actually sitting down at tight end 21, right around Chig Okonkwo, Tucker Kraft, and Michael Mayer. And while that's fair, Ja'Tavion Sanders is lined up for a lot of volume. I mean, we saw in Dave Canales' system last year that Cade Otton had a pretty productive season, even with Baker Mayfield. And so I think that Ja'Tavion Sanders on this offense is going to be the starting tight end. There's not much depth behind him, so he's literally going to be thrust into a starting role. And you can get him right now for pretty much a third, maybe probably a third, maybe 2/3 if you have to do it. I wouldn't go as far as saying you have to throw a second at him unless it's you're going to win and it's the last pick. But even then, that might be a little too rich. You don't really have to do that. You could use some other tight ends and tier up into them maybe if you want some youth. But you could probably also use some of the other wide receivers, running backs, really anything to get a tight end 21. And he's only a 21-year-old tight end. So that's really young for a rookie tight end. Generally, they come out after 4 years. So Ja'Tavion Sanders, 6'4", 245 pounds, runs that 4.6 940-yard dash, has 7 touchdowns and 1,200 receiving yards out of Texas. Decent enough college production, decent enough athletic profile, but a really good role on the Carolina Panthers. We can go ahead and move on now to, let's do the New Orleans Saints. This is a tough one. This is really, really a tough one. This offense just has really not looked good over the last couple seasons with their head coaching hire. And this year, though, they are expected to take a little bit of a step forward. So I think that there's someone that we could talk about here. And his name is going to be Derek Carr. Derek Carr right now, if you go over to Keep Trade Cut, is actually valued as the quarterback 33, which to me is kind of ridiculous given there's only 32 starting quarterbacks. He's one of them, and he's not one of the top 32 dynasty quarterbacks. I really don't get it. Derek Carr last year wasn't great, and honestly, he's never been great throughout his career, but he's always been good enough. I mean, last year, 14.7 points per game, which was 22nd already better than his dynasty value, who had almost 4,000 receiving or passing yards, 3,878, and had 25 passing touchdowns. That's really, really not bad. Chris Olave is going into another year, right? Alvin Kamara is still there as of now, so there's still really good pass catchers. Rashid Shaheed should take a step forward, hopefully, and they, drafted Bub Means. It's not like it was a great pick or an early pick or anything like that, but he still does have some speed, so that is just another pass catcher. Either way, I think that Derek Carr is primed to at least outproduce his price tag. I mean, even his underdog ADP, if you want to go that far, is QB 28. And again, he was QB 22 on a points per game basis last year, played all 17 games, has averaged around 14 to 15 points per game really his entire career. The only time he's had less than that was his rookie season, where he averaged 12.8. And even then, that was 27th on a points per game basis. And we're talking about a guy, again, who is the Dynasty QB 33 on Keep Trade Cut. That's just a bit too low. And I've never been, again, the biggest Derek Carr fan, but he's a starting quarterback. They're going to pass the ball a decent bit. And they actually brought in the Clint Kubiak to be their new offensive coordinator out of San Francisco. So that's pretty exciting stuff too. Either way, I think that Derek Carr is primed to at least outperform his value, be a good enough quarterback, and I don't see a reason not to be buying him at his current price tag, especially in our superflex leagues. He's a really good quarterback 3. You could rely on him as your quarterback 2, although I don't really recommend it. But either way, him being 33 years old, him not being that exciting of a dynasty asset, but still being productive makes him really easy to acquire and useful for your dynasty team. So I would go out and get Derek Carr. The next team is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But before we get into that, we should probably hear a little bit about the Breakout Finder.
Oh, hey, it's Mr. Breakout Finder coming at you. The Breakout Finder features 3 key tools. A database of metrics that include speed score, college dominator, breakout age, but also Breakout Finder only stats like dynamic score, level of competition, teammate score. All of these things are part of the overall Breakout Finder algorithm that pinpoints the probability that a player will break out. Everyone's talking about my model does this and my model does that. Well, we give you the data points that go into the model. We have a feature that lets you compare players, and then we give you the precise probability of every wide receiver, every running back, sorted and filterable by class year. So when I'm talking to my friends and I need to show them why I'm so bullish on player X, I pull out the Breakout Finder and bam, there he is. So go to the App Store, go to Google Play. It's $5 to get the Breakout Finder, and then a couple extra bucks to get some of these additional enhanced stats. Go download it and thank me later.
Yeah, go get that Breakout Finder. It is awesome stuff. And speaking of a guy ready to break out or perhaps re-break out, we should talk about Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receiver Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin right now at Keep Trade Cut is valued as the wide receiver 44, which is a pretty decent fall from grace to a guy who has at least graced the wide receiver 20 range in Dynasty and been a very, very good producer over the last few years. But unfortunately, in 2022, he suffered an injury. And last year, he kind of was recovering from it, playing through it. And it just didn't really work out too well. But when you look back at it, it really wasn't that bad of a season. He had 131 targets, which is the second most he's had in his career. He's had 83 receptions, which is kind of what made it worse. He didn't bring in many of his targets. In fact, he was 53rd in catchable target rate last year. Only 69% of his targets were even catchable. But still, off of those 83 receptions, he had 1,024 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. So really the big thing we're hoping for next year is to bring in a few more receptions and to bring in a couple more touchdowns. But either way, he's valued as the wide receiver 44. And on Underdog, even for our redraft guys, he's the wide receiver 36. And last year, he averaged the 34th most points per game at 12.3. So it's already better, right? Last year, a bad year, was better than where he's being valued at. Now, another year removed from injury, he is primed to continue to be a consistent producer in fantasy. Again, 131 targets last year. To put that into perspective, 2021, his best season when he averaged 17.3 points per game, which was 7th most in the NFL. He only had 128 targets, brought in 98 of them for 1,100 yards and 5 touchdowns. So he had a good amount of volume last year. Just the targets weren't catchable as shown. And he's going to be even more healthy this year, with a full offseason, another year with Baker Mayfield, I expect him to bounce back a bit. And even though he was unhealthy last year, he was still really, really good as a route runner. In fact, he was second in win rate versus man, and 8th in overall route win rate, and second in total route wins. So, I mean, that's a very, very good route running wide receiver, like we've come to expect from him over his career. A really good slot receiver, a guy who's going to be out there running a ton of routes like he did last year, was 16th in routes run amongst the NFL, despite, again, being less than 100%. Again, still averaged 12 points per game last year, which was 34th most, and is valued as the wide receiver 44 in Dynasty. Chris Godwin is an easy buy right now. He's only 28 years old. He's got still the size at 6'1", 210 pounds. He still has the speed with his 4.4 40-yard dash, and he has the production over the last few years. 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons. 6 straight seasons with double-digit fantasy points per game. You've got to be buying Chris Godwin, guys. Which, of course, leads us to the Atlanta Falcons, and you already know where I'm going with this. I've got to be buying Kyle Pitts right now. Kyle Pitts is sitting at the Dynasty tight end 5, if I remember correctly. I'm going to double check that on Keep Trade Cut. And that is just too low, especially when compared to some of the other tight ends at the market. Yes, he is the tight end 5. Right now, I just don't get it. He is behind some tight ends, namely Brock Bowers, Dalton Kincaid, and Trey McBride, that haven't had the production that Kyle Pitts had. And for the case of Trey McBride and Dalton Kincaid, they're a year older than Kyle Pitts, despite being in the league less time. Kyle Pitts was drafted as the 4th overall player for a reason. He has insane athleticism. He's 6'6", 245 pounds. He runs that 4.49 40-yard dash. He has the 1,000-yard season as a rookie. And now they're bringing in Kyle Pitts in this Rams-Vikings type Sean McVay offense that led to TJ Hawkinson being on pace to be the tight end 1 last year prior to his injury. Multiple games with double-digit targets. I can't think of a single reason why you wouldn't be taking Kyle Pitts at his value right now. It used to be he was completely unattainable. Now you can actually get him, and you can actually trade some tight ends that have been worse than him for Kyle Pitts plus. And I think that's a very easy move to make right now if you have Trey McBride or Dalton Kincaid. They are older than him. You can get Kyle Pitts plus, and they're probably going to be outproduced by Kyle Pitts. And I'll leave you with one more thing. Kyle Pitts has a lot of things that Drake London doesn't. He's taller. He's faster. He's heavier. He's had a 1,000-yard season. Kyle Pitts is the true receiving alpha on the Atlanta Falcons offense. It's not Drake London, although he's still going to be really, really good. It's going to be Kyle Pitts. He's going to end up being a focal point from Kirk Cousins. He's going to show us why he was the Dynasty tight end 1 for a very long time. And he's going to remind us of who he was his rookie season when he had 1,000 receiving yards. He's going to do it again. This time, the touchdowns will come as he goes on to finish as the tight end 1 this season and re-solidifies himself as the tight end 1 in Dynasty. So, guys, that is it. One buy from every NFC South team. I know it's a shortened Trade Gods episode, a little, not a sneak peek, but just a short one, an extra, if you will. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll be back next week, me and Matty Kiwoom, so make sure you go follow him on Twitter. I'm sure he'll have some takes about who he's buying in the NFC South in the comment section or something, or on Twitter, so make sure you stay out for that. But those are the 4 buys. The Panthers were getting Jatavian Sanders. The Buccaneers were getting Chris Godwin. The Saints were buying Derek Carr. And for the Atlanta Falcons, we'll be buying Kyle Pitts. You all have a wonderful evening. We'll see you next week. Peace.
From the Podfather to you, I deeply appreciate you tuning in. And many ask, what can I do? What can I do to help support the host, the research they do, the production costs? Go to playerprofiler.com, Dynasty Deluxe, World Famous Draft Kit, Rankings, DFS Dominator, and of course, data analysis. Subscribe to any one of those, and you support all of us and take Player Profiler to the moon.